Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for December 8th, 2025. There's a lot to cover today because we're looking at a period where we're seeing the end of 500 years of a historic era. And these eras tend to end fairly suddenly. It seems like they're treading water, they're going very slowly into new directions, maybe including into bad directions, and then all of a sudden, boom, something happens, and the momentum picks up. And we've got to make sure that the momentum picks up in the right direction, because there are clearly differences between the two directions where the world is moving, one of which is toward a Westphalian system where nations respect each other's sovereignty and work together for mutual benefit. The other is an imperial system run by predatory banks that loot the populations of the weaker countries, that deny them sovereignty, and insist that those raw materials of those countries belong to the imperial powers. And what we're seeing now is a very significant fight, which is breaking out again in the United States, US versus Europe, China, Russia, and India moving in a real direction toward a new economic development architecture. And that is also a new strategic architecture. So let's look at the situation, break down where the problem is, because there are ambiguities in the US policy. There were two things that were announced recently. The first was the National Strategic Study Memo for 2025. The second is something called the Genesis Mission, which is a science driver project. But both of these have ambiguities. So let's look at them very quickly. And there'll be more to come in the next days on the National Security Memo. But what it essentially does is say that the U.S. is not aligned with Europe anymore. The U.S. has interests that are global, and these include an alliance with Russia and China for development. And this is something that is the direction which the LaRouches have been insisting we have to go for. And Trump takes a step that direction, then a half step back. And what I mean by that is that on the one hand, he's pulling out, the United States pulling out of the war in Ukraine, saying to Europe, if you want a war, go for it, but don't include us. Now, the problem with that is that you can't be half in and half out. The ambiguity there is basically saying Europe should continue the war, continue the destruction, just don't count on us. That's not good enough. And the idea that the United States is strong enough to impose its will, as we saw in Israel when Netanyahu agreed to a ceasefire, even though it's not fully there. If the U.S. asserts itself as the leader of the policies toward peace and development, countries will follow. If the U.S., on the other hand, says we're going to take care of America first, we're going to stay back, then you're going to see things such as the idiot Starmer, such as Merz, such as Macron, continuing on a war perspective. So you can't have an overall peace policy with the same method that you had for permanent war. Helga Tzepp-LaRouche has written a statement on this. We'll be getting it out. Basically, she said a new national security strategy requires a new national security strategy, obviously. So that's what I want to say on the national security strategy. Now, on the Genesis mission, this is kind of interesting because the language of it sounds a lot like what Lyndon LaRouche had been saying going back to the 70s. We need a science driver. We need to organize a research and development scientific discovery program in the areas of scientific frontiers. And the breakthroughs in those areas will spill over into the general economy. And that this needs a crash program. Now, the Genesis mission that was announced at the end of November has that language to it. It basically says, and I'll read you the language in a second, it says we're going to build a scientific discovery platform that is unique and new for the world. It says, the mission is a national initiative to build the world's most powerful scientific platform to accelerate discovery science, strengthen national security, and drive energy innovation. This will be an integrated platform connecting the world's best supercomputers, experimental facilities, artificial intelligence systems, and unique data sets across every major scientific domain to double the productivity and impact of American research and innovation within a decade. Now, this is where we come up with what I would say is an ambiguity, which is a problem. Are you doing this just for the United States, or is it a project for the world? Now, in announcing this project, they said there are 3 challenges. Now, listen to the language of this, and you'll see why I'm saying there's a problem with the intent. The first challenge, American energy dominance. Not cooperation, not improvements, but dominance. And it goes on to say that what it says how we're going to do that is fine. Accelerating advanced nuclear, fusion, and grid modernization. In other words, upgrade everything to the highest productive levels based on scientific discoveries. Great, that's what should be done. But why American dominance? Second point, advancing discovery science. Absolutely, that's what LaRouche's 4 laws include. The third point, ensuring national security through advanced AI technology. Now, why do we have to have enhancing American security? If we had a competent foreign policy based on mutual benefit, we wouldn't have enemies. We could work with Russia and China. I mean, look what happened just this last week. Putin went to India. Do you know how hard the British have been working on the Indians to get them to break with Russia? Do you remember how many times the imbecile Tony Blinken, as Secretary of State, went to India and said, no, stick with us. Watch out for Russia. They're bad guys. They'll do bad things to you. And what happened? Blinken's history. He's out there in an ash can somewhere. Whereas Modi was meeting with Putin, invited Putin to India, and they talked about major projects that will affect the world's economy over the next 20 to 30 years. Now, meanwhile, with all the sanctions and everything, sanctions partly aiming to break India from Russia and break the Russian economy, and also to isolate China. Did you happen to see that China has a $1 trillion plus trade surplus so far this year? So the attacks on the Chinese economy with tariffs, with sanctions, has had little effect on China. And so what we're looking at is economies like Russia and China and India advancing and putting forward a policy that raises the hopes of the developing sector, of the global south, that they not only will have sovereignty, but an ability to turn that sovereignty into economic advance for their populations. That's what the United States should be taking the leadership to do, instead of seeking energy dominance, instead of trying to say that we aren't going to be the policemen of the world, but we're going to dictate the policies. Now, the biggest problem here is the whole question of the nature of scientific advance. Is the science to give you greater capacity to collect and store metadata, that is the information about your citizens, to find out how they think, how they act, and then to manipulate their conduct and their behavior? That's how the consumer society works. That's what artificial intelligence aims at. That's why they collect the data to figure out what advertisements to send you on your platform to convince you to go spend money on these basically innovations you don't need. Now, the Chinese, on the other hand, are engaged in a process of making artificial intelligence the servant of scientific progress. Now, that's what the director of the Genesis mission said the U.S. is going to do. But then it was framed in the context of U.S. national security and superiority. That's where it has to change. Now, the essential issue here is that artificial intelligence is a dual-use kind of thing. On the one hand, it can improve productivity. It can help you organize an economy to maximize efficiency and productivity. Or it can enable you to have a predictive behavioral model that will help you build up the debt. Because what's happening with artificial intelligence is a growing bubble is being created. And you know what happens when there's a bubble? There's a pop, and then there's a bailout of the super rich, a bailout of the too big to fail, and a collapse of everyone else. So this is something we're going to be looking at in the days and weeks ahead. The ambiguity between the United States must be number one versus we can be a good partner for every nation on the planet, and that's what's the best for us and for world peace. We have to resolve that in favor of mutual benefit. And that's what we'll be talking about. We're putting forward a program for a global Glass Steagall, for a global Hamiltonian credit policy, for cooperation in space and in nuclear science and so on. That's the solution. President Trump has taken us halfway there, but it's still couched within the terms of the Cold War America First ideology. And that's where the problem is. So watch this site. We're going to continue to discuss this. We need a population that understands that the old system is dead. We're building a new system, and the new system is completely outside the containment of the old 500, 600-year-old imperial system. So thanks for joining me today. Make sure you share this video, get other people involved, and let's make this year the year where we see the transition to a new paradigm speed up rather than get bogged down in war and depressions.